As a part of Women's History Month, last week we talked a bit about Deborah and Jael, two amazing female heroes in the Bible. And there have, of course, been many well-known female heroes in American history who are also fit to lift up and honor during Women's History Month, like abolitionists Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, and Harriet Beecher Stowe, like civil rights activists Marian Anderson, Rosa Parks, and Gloria Steinem, like politicians Kamala Harris, AOC, and Hillary Clinton, like justices Sandra Day O'Connor, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and Ketanji Brown Jackson, like healthcare professionals Clara Barton and Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell, like scientists Marie Curie and Jane Goodall, like aviators Amelia Earhart and Sally Ride, like athletes Simone Biles and Peggy Fleming, like entertainers Aretha Franklin, Jodie Foster, and Sandra Oh, like writers Emily Dickinson, Maya Angelou, and Sylvia Plath, like clergy and theologians Reverend Annette Brown Blackwell, Dr. Phyllis Tribble, and Dr. Dolores Williams. Many other important women in history appear on the Women's History Month poster in our hallway and on our bulletins this morning. And the list of important American women goes on and on and on. And it includes unheralded women too. And this morning, as part of our Women's History Month service, I'm going to talk about someone who we could hardly call unheralded or ordinary. She's been hailed as the 20th century's most influential woman. President Truman called her the first lady of the world, Eleanor Roosevelt. And at the start, I wanted to disclose a few things up front. Eleanor Roosevelt's dad, brother, and her own favorite child each had the first name Elliot, spelled correctly with 2 L's and 2 T's, but that's not the reason that I chose to talk about Eleanor Roosevelt this morning. Also, in 1938, the Roosevelts held their son David's wedding at the church I served in Massachusetts, and I've long admired Eleanor Roosevelt, and I was pretty stoked that I got to sit in the pew she sat in, walk in the aisle she walked in, and stand on the spot. She can be seen standing in photos of the event. But those cool happenings are also not the reason I chose to talk about Eleanor Roosevelt. I chose her because, like Mary Magdalene, she was a woman of considerable means who followed Jesus closely and did great good, even though she, also like Mary Magdalene, experienced a number of what we can fairly call demons. I count at least 7 from her horrible childhood. Her parents were very abusive toward her when they were even around. One was a mentally ill alcoholic, and the other scorned and disliked Eleanor and let her, as a little girl, know it. In her formative years, Eleanor was often abandoned by her parents and left for months on end in the care of others. And when she was 8 years old, her mother died. And a few months later, her brother Elliot also died. And then just 2 years later, her father died. She wasn't allowed to attend any of their funerals. An orphan at 10, she was put in the care of very abusive relatives and teachers. That's at least 7 childhood demons that haunted her as they would anyone. I also chose her because I picked up a book a few weeks ago called Eleanor, A Spiritual Biography by Harold Smith. And I learned that Eleanor Roosevelt's Christianity was centered as my own faith, and many of yours has been centered. Smith writes in the book, verses urging compassion toward those Jesus called the least of these stimulated Eleanor's faith and imagination to find ways to care for the marginalized least in American society. This, she understood, was what a Christian must do. In 1937, Eleanor argued, quote, there is very little actual fundamental law, really only love one another. The rest is all interpretation, even the 10 Commandments, end quote. You could pretty much hear me preach the meaning of those words penned by Eleanor in one way or another every week up here. And you may or may not recall that Mary Magdalene was the focus of a Women's History Month sermon last year. Mary Magdalene is an exceptionally important figure in our faith. She is remembered in the Bible and other early Christian writings as having a prominent leadership role in the Jesus movement while Jesus was alive and after his death and resurrection. And Peter and the male followers' response to the terror Rome rained down on Jesus at the end of Holy Week was to understandably deny connections to him and hide. Mary didn't deny him. She didn't hide as best she could. She stayed by Jesus' side. She was at the cross. She followed him to the grave. She went to tend to his body. She was the first to discover he lived on, and she was the first to spread that good news. I believe that without Mary Magdalene and her experiences and willingness to share them, the Jesus movement very likely would not have survived the crucifixion. Mary Magdalene is one of the most influential figures in the history of Christianity, and while she does not usually get that credit, she surely should. And last year I suggested that we can and we should all strive to be the kind of Jesus follower that Mary Magdalene was. And Eleanor Roosevelt and others may not have thought it, but she, Eleanor, was that kind of Jesus follower in many of our lifetimes, or near to many of our lifetimes. Mary Magdalene, we're told, had 7 demons removed from her, and she faithfully followed Jesus and used her considerable means to provide for the Jesus following. And we don't know what demons Mary had, and while modern readers tend to think that meant she was crazy or devil-possessed, having demons in the context of Mary's story doesn't necessarily mean she needed evil sort of spirits exorcised. Back in her day, demons were thought to cause illnesses and debilitations, not just mental trouble. So the gospel account may mean Mary was sick and Jesus healed her. Other scholars suggest Mary's demons had nothing to do with illness in a physical or mental sense, but relate to Mary's personal spiritual work, casting out the old ways in order to fully follow Jesus' way. And still others think the claim of demons in Mary may have been added to weaken the role that Mary played in the Jesus movement, or maybe the opposite, that Jesus exercised the stigma of her being a female in a male-dominated culture by letting her into the following as an equal and making her a leader. Whatever demon obstacles Mary Magdalene had, they were overcome. And the demon obstacles of Eleanor's childhood we know about from Eleanor's writing and the work of modern historians. All of them were overcome in the sense that they didn't stop her from greatness and a lifelong following of Jesus that included using the considerable means at her disposal to find ways to care for the marginalized least in American society and to make life better for more of our people. Eleanor was a woman of deep faith who, like Mary Magdalene, followed Jesus and Jesus' way, and as a result, she helped people in dire trouble, especially oppressed people. She took their side, despite risk, despite loss, despite threats, despite the option to just live in wealthy comfort. Eleanor did it all for love. She felt that her faith required as much. She often quoted a version of the words from our invocation, James 2:26. Faith without works is dead. And she put her faith to work. In 1941, she famously visited the Tuskegee training site for a photo op promoting the use of Black American airmen. A huge controversy at the time. And sensing that pictures of her on the ground would not be enough, she broke Alabama's segregation laws by approaching Chief Anderson, a Black pilot, and asked for a ride. Her hope was to help defeat the ridiculous racist notion that African Americans couldn't fly a plane. Chief Anderson flew her around a bit, and after they landed, she climbed out of the plane and exclaimed for all to hear, "Well, you can fly all right." And racists went ballistic, but photos of her made more open-minded folk think, since Mrs. Roosevelt trusted the Tuskegee pilot, we should too. And the Tuskegee Airmen famously went on to have a legendary and heroic record as pilots in World War II. And while they did that great work, the Tuskegee pilots and troops sadly still constantly experienced racism. And then when Eleanor would learn about this or that racist experience of theirs, she'd make a point to effectively pull rank and intervene, much to the chagrin of racist officers, including generals. Because it wasn't just in the war effort she worked to oppose racism. She did it whenever she could. She insisted everyone deserved equal access to good jobs, wages, and perks at home. She was the first lady to actively increase the number of black men and women on the paid staff in the White House. She fought to stop the horrifying, widespread practice of lynching at the time. She resigned from the Daughters of the American Revolution when racism caused the DAR to cancel internationally acclaimed singer Mary Anderson's concert in Washington, D.C. And Eleanor didn't just resign. She worked hard with Anderson and others to move the concert to the Lincoln Memorial, where on Easter Sunday, 1939, 75,000 people of all races and ages famously gathered together in the mall at Mary Anderson's concert, celebrating the singer, her songs, Easter, and civil rights. Her faith caused her to work as a pioneer in women's rights. She reshaped the role of First Lady into a position of activism where she advocated for black rights and women's rights, for economic justice, and on other social justice issues. And when her time as First Lady was over, she led international efforts for human rights on a global scale, serving for a decade as a UN delegate. As chair of the United Nations Human Rights Commission, she was instrumental in crafting the UN Declaration of Human Rights. In the 1950s, she opposed McCarthyism. In the 1960s, she pushed for housing desegregation and protections for voter rights activists. At President Kennedy's request, she chaired the President's Commission on the Status of Women and worked on a groundbreaking study about gender discrimination and the Equal Pay Act. President Kennedy even nominated Eleanor for the Nobel Peace Prize. And I've just touched on some of this remarkable woman's accomplishments and her faith that she put into action. I didn't even get to her acting as virtually a co-president to her ailing husband, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Eleanor not only influenced his accomplishments, she had many accomplishments of her own. And I remember in Massachusetts when I consciously put myself in the places Eleanor sat or walked or stood in 1938. In my efforts to remember her, I sensed that sort of a whoosh of the goodness of her being. Ripples of the goodness, the seeds that were planted on her good soil, her life. They live on in that regard. She's thought by many to be the 20th century's most influential woman in a very positive way. And I love that she got there, living out that quote of hers I read at the start. There's very little actual fundamental law. Really, only love one another. The rest is all interpretation, even the Ten Commandments. And I want to end with another quote from Eleanor Roosevelt. She wrote, "I think anyone who really thinks about the life of Christ must, by necessity, be influenced by it. It has always seemed to me that if we ever succeeded in living up to the standards which he set for us, we would eliminate much of the conflict in the world. We would certainly get along better in our communities." To that quote, and to the amazing woman of faith in history who said it and acted it out, I say, amen and well